My name is Don Kanowski, and I got involved in this project in about 2006. I saw this log home sitting by the Cormorant Lutheran Church, and talked to Roger Prewy, whose farm it was on, and what Roger did was to put this church, or this cabin, on the Cormorant Church auction in 2007. So I bought the cabin on the auction and wasn't exactly sure what to do with it, if I should move it to a lake lot and remodel it or what I should do. And then I got thinking about Steam Threshers Hill, because I'd been coming to a lot of shows here, and decided that for the preservation of history this would be the place to go, because as I got into it I found out who had lived in it and who had built it, things like that. So last year in May we moved it to this location, and we replaced all the logs that were on the bottom of the cabin. We got those logs from a gentleman by the name of Richard Holmes, who has a cabin that has started to deteriorate over on County 15 by Audubon, and we put those around the bottom because everything there needed to be replaced. And then we got it set down on the original stones that it was sitting on over by the church. And just a little point of interest, I think that Sievert Olsen was probably one of the smartest of the Scandinavians that came over, because any one of those people could have donated land for a church. Sievert donated land for the church, and then in the wintertime when everybody was harnessing up and trying to get to church in the cold weather, all he had to do was walk about a block and a half and he was in church. So I think he was the smartest one of the whole bunch. And anyway, as I got involved in bringing this thing over here, we started working on the repair on it. And as you can see, there is plaster on the inside of the cabin at this time. And if we could work our way out into the kitchen, I could show you the different stages of how this worked out. When they built the cabin, of course, what they had was just pure logs. And that was great at the time it was built. But then, of course, they wanted to modernize a little bit and have some light reflection, so they whitewashed it with lime and sand. And that gave them a good white interior. But then as time went on, of course, they started with lath and plaster in the houses in the area, so they put lath and plaster over it, and then all of a sudden they had a modern house. And that's, of course, what people wanted. It's like in today's market, everybody wants to upgrade a little bit in their houses. So this was upgraded, and as we go through and set it up for history, we may take some of the plaster off the walls so we can expose the logs. Some we may leave just to show the difference. Let me show you, if you can get the camera in here, some of the craftsmanship in this house. As you can see, these logs were built for the kitchen of the house. It was all built at the same time. And look at the craftsmanship with just using a saw and an axe. That came through, and it is really, really nice craftsmanship. So they did a good job when it came to building this. If you can turn around and look right behind you, there is a door that's hanging there that's been there for 140 years, stood open most of that time, and is not sagged. And that was from the craftsmanship of the people that built it. That was all inlaid by hand. These braces are all inlaid and angled down so that that door can hang there another 140 years and never sag. And that's really craftsmanship. If you'll notice in here, the doorways are relatively low, and the reason for that is to try and contain the heat in each room. Right here stood a round stove, a parlor stove, and that's what heated this entire area, this and the bedroom. In the kitchen, of course, there was a cook stove, and that took care of heating the kitchen. So when they built it, they didn't want the transfer of heat to be too great, and that's the reason for the low doorways and the low ceilings. It didn't take as much to heat it. This house is known as a log home. The difference between a log home and a log house is a log cabin and a log house is that a log house is a two-story. There were a lot of log cabins built as the people settled here, but log homes were fewer and far between. So this one had an upstairs. The room I'm standing in, when Glovestids lived here, they were the last ones to live here, and this was Gary Glovestid's parents' bedroom. The bedroom downstairs was the bedroom that his grandparents were in. Then Gary and his sisters used the large bedroom. And as you can see, this is a good-sized room, so there was easy to have 3 people in this room. The unique thing about this room is that it has never had any siding on it or anything, and you can see all of the axe marks as they squared off the logs and built this up. And one of the things they did originally to keep the nature out, to keep the wind and that out, they chinked it, and when they chinked it, they used peat moss. Peat moss, you can just go down to the slough and get that, but that would dry very rapidly, so it was good to use as a chinking. And you can see in most of the places here that they had it chinked with peat moss to keep the elements out. So they did a good job when they built this, and these logs, when you look at the walls, they could have just chipped off a small amount of this in order to make it usable, but the wall is really quite flat, and so they took a lot of time to chip these off to make good walls out of it. The way they heated the upstairs was the parlor stove was directly below this. The chimney did not go all the way down into the living room, but instead they brought the stovepipe up through a hole in the floor and brought it into the chimney up here. That way you could get heat to radiate off of that chimney to heat the upstairs. It, I'm sure, wasn't too warm, but it was a way of getting some heat up to the upstairs of this building. This was the pantry where they stored as many items for the kitchen as they could. They did have a root cellar under this, and they had a trap door in which they could get down. We haven't dug any root cellar down in here at this point, but if you were to go to Roger Prewee's farmstead where this was taken off, you'd still see the stairway going down into the root cellar, and you'd see how they had used logs to create the root cellar. So they had good storage in a small area.
Be sure to tune in next week when we take a look at some of the tools that were used to build this historic log home.